I don't like to call it a schema markup dead, but like, what is the value of schema markup in this new world? Um, as we get started, let's just get warmed up. We have many, many people, over 400 people registered for today. So please put in the chat, where are you joining us from? I know Andrea is joining us from Italy. Mark and I are here in Canada. We got a ton of snow, so I was shoveling snow this morning. Looks like we have people from all around the world. So from Spain, from New York, Wisconsin, Chicago, Seattle. Oh, I see rainy Los Angeles. Awesome. Netherlands, love that. UK. We are just delighted to have this conversation, to really bring this conversation around, how the value of schema markup has evolved over the years, and what these two semantic technologists, Andrea and Mark, what their kind of view of this is on. So let's go ahead and jump in. We're going to start with some introductions. You can get to know who's on our panel today. So my name is Martha van Berkel. I am the CEO and co-founder here at Schema App. I do have a technical background, so this is my knowledge graph. And I actually grew up in enterprise, so I spent 14 years at Cisco. And a fun fact about me is I used to drive a 1965 Austin Healey Sprite, and my actual car was in the movie called Losing Chase. And Kevin Bacon used to drive my car. And here in North America, we sort of play a game of 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. And I love how the schema markup and the relationships I've defined using it allow you to infer and figure out that you can now win the Kevin Bacon game. I'm delighted today to be joined also by Mark van Berkel, my co-founder. Mark, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, thanks, Martha. Yeah, nice to be here. And yeah, just as a kind of a bit of a background, I'm the CTO and co-founder here at Schema App. And I studied a master's degree in Spanish technology at the University of Toronto. Back in 2007, I actually helped build an early prototype using AI and OWL, the web ontology language, for SAP in a project called Parts Weaver. So I've been in this kind of space, semantic technology, for quite a while, and I love it. And it's been super interesting in the schema space.
Amazing. Welcome, Mark. We're also joined by Andrea Volpini. Please take a moment to introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Martha, for setting this up first, because it was your idea, and I really like the idea of doing something together. I'm now in Rome, in Italy. There's no snow, but it's almost aperitivo time, so you will feel that I'm kind of distracted, not so distracted, but it's late in the evening. So I'm CEO and co-founder of WordLift. I run a small company called Inside Out 10. We also created and founded another semantic web company in Austria called RedLink. I've been working in the field of symbolic AI for now over 20 years or so. Fell in love with SEO at some point in my life when I started to work on WordLift. I didn't give too much credit to SEO before that, truth to be told. I've been working on content management system for many years. I've been now investing sometimes on blending symbolic AI with deep learning, and that's pretty much my specialty.
Amazing. Well, we're going to use both of your specialties to really talk about the value of schema markup. Now, we always like to address like the elephant in the room right at the beginning. There has been lots of conversation online around schema markup being dead. Ironically, we had already planned to do a webinar on the value beyond. And so we want to just address some facts that are true. Right. So search engines are excellent at extracting content without structured data or schema markup, large language models as well. In fact, some of the large language models like Perplexity and ChatGPT, there's not strong evidence that we know that they're sort of rendering JavaScript. And these facts are all true. And I think we just want to sort of acknowledge that we're not debating these. We know that these are true, but we really do believe that there is value sort of to SEO and to the semantic data layer. And that's what we're going to really focus today's conversation on. So again, if you want to debate these, we'll talk that offline. Today, we're going to talk about, the value that we know exists, and that's measurable. Okay, with that address, let's go ahead and jump in. So the value of schema markup has been evolving. It has not been stagnant. And, I've been lucky enough to be kind of playing in the SEO space since about 2013. And what we have seen the value of is from rich results, disambiguation in search, so clarity in search, and then really building a semantic data layer, or what we sometimes at Schema App refer to as the content knowledge graph. So these are the three different things that we're going to talk about today. Now, if you have questions, we will have time for questions. You can go ahead and put those in the chat, and I will bring them up sort of when appropriate in order for us to address them. If we don't get them addressed, don't worry. We'll actually go ahead and follow up with you afterwards to make sure that you get questions. We really want the questions. We want people to get curious. And we are going to get a little technical, right? We're going to talk a little bit about sort of semantics. So let's go ahead and jump in and talk about the value of schema markup in SEO. So we're going to start with rich results. Now, rich results are still performing very, very well. So across our enterprise customers, we went and pulled the data over the last 7 months in order to see sort of which ones are performing best or showing the most search appearance. How often are they showing up? And so you can see from this graph that, product snippets and review snippets are indeed sort of the highest performing rich results that we have today. The others are performing, they just don't have quite as many search appearances as the others. And just for kind of context, our enterprise clients are primarily in technology, finance, and healthcare. We then sort of double clicked into product snippets and, to say like, is it also sort of, are we still getting good conversion off them? Are we still seeing sort of the click-through rate increase? And the answer is yes. And the reason I address this is because like in a time of AI overviews, when, so many queries are now being answered in the SERP, and I think we're just going to see that continue, rich results are performing and providing clicks to websites. So if we ask the question of, is it a strategy that works to help provide clicks to your website? The answer is yes. Okay, that's the first one. Second one I wanted to address was disambiguation in search. So disambiguation in search is really where we want to really identify and clarify, what is it that we're talking about. And at Schema App, we call it entity linking. And it's really this process of identifying key things, about what is it. So in this example, we're describing exactly what is Jaguar. And we're nesting that sort of within the schema markup. And the idea here is that we're using authoritative directories like Google's Knowledge Graph, Wikidata, Wikipedia, and we're embedding that in the markup. Now, our hypothesis, a year and a half ago was, are we actually seeing this have an impact to SEO metrics, right? It's a good question. And what we did find is that when we provide that clarity or that disambiguation, we're actually see it have an impact on those queries related to it. And so here's an example of how it shows up in the schema markup, how it gets nested. In this one, it was a landing page specifically targeting a region. And of course, like we've added sort of the same as for those disambiguated kind of entities in there. And when we did a control group versus the group that we added this sort of entity linking to, we saw great results. So we saw an increase in clicks, an increase in impressions, and we also saw an increase in performance for those queries related to this state or sort of local queries like near me. So again, measurable data. This is yet one example from our clients, but we've seen this sort of across the board sort of work. Now, one might ask, like we said earlier, the facts were that, large language models don't need schema markup in order to get it done. And so what is the hypothesis? Like, why is this moving the needle? I like to think it's like comes down to dollars, right? Like it's allows them to have confidence in the data. It allows them to more easily understand sort of what it's about. And the good news is, I think for most people is that, it truly is sort of still helping move the needle. And so I always like to see measurable results, things that work. This is what we're seeing work sort of in the SEO space. And let me pause here. Mark, Andre, anything you want to add into this?
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot of evidence of the fact that rich results in some verticals at least are alive and kicking. I can see these reflected also in the adoption of the markup. Usually, in the last years, I've been analyzing millions of websites with structured data with the Web Almanac initiative, and it's evident that the adoption rate for some classes related to e-commerce and products are skyrocketing versus other classes that have seen maybe an uptake a few years back, and now they're kind of settling. So there is, of course, an evolving ecosystem of how search engines are consuming this information, but it's quite clear that There is a value in some verticals more than others. So it's not a, kind of a mandate that you have to use structured data to drive clicks, but it's quite evident that it's working, right? And it's working in a short term. So usually you don't need to spend too much time waiting for measuring these results. Of course, it's also really related to the cost, right? If the cost of the implementation is too high because things get complicated, then it's hard to get a positive return. So there's also value of how simple it is for you to plug in and manage data. I think that's another aspect.
Amazing. Yeah, it's a strategy that works in this world of ever changing things that some things aren't sort of at the get-go. We know that it works. All right, let's go ahead and move on. I want to really switch gears here because I said we would talk today about the semantic data layer and the value sort of beyond SEO. And that's really where Andrea and Mark are going to kind of walk us through. So Mark, I'm going to hand it over to you.
All right, thanks, Martha. Just want to start off by maybe covering a couple different things. So schema markup using the web vocabulary schema.org is providing this common language, right, to define your entities on your website. And using schema markup then forms a basis of these entities or these concepts that are on your website. And you can actually organize this using ad IDs. The schema markup, the traditional view, I would say, is that schema.org and markup is useful to achieve rich results. However, I intend to shift the conversation, if I could, to having schema markup being the foundational layer for your content knowledge graph. And that to me is where the real value driver will come out for marketing organizations. So what is a knowledge graph? It's a structured framework for organizing information that connects concepts and entities and relationships. It's kind of like a smart web of data where each piece of information is linked to others in a meaningful way. And for example, like a knowledge graph in a film industry, the film might be linked to its actors, to the director, a genre, the release date, and using the schema.org vocabulary, you can provide that to the LLMs, and because they've crawled the web, they actually understand the schema.org vocabulary, and so like you can actually provide it data in schema.org terms, and it actually would understand that, and it can help with that. But that common vocabulary can help us to understand the relationships between things rather than just storing disconnected facts. It doesn't have to be just schema.org. There are lots of other kind of ontologies and vocabularies out there, but it's very well adopted, as Andrea has pointed out in this research with the Web Almanac. The ad ID attribute, to me, you may be familiar with this, but it's a powerful little attribute for defining entities of a knowledge graph. When used correctly, the ad ID establishes the entity home, so the primary source of truth for that concept on the internet. Like each entity should be defined just once, and ideally you're reusing that ad ID consistently to consolidate those references, and therefore kind of create like a central point of truth and overall improving your data quality. Now, this is important not just for like avoiding schema drift in your website, in your content, in your data, but also it is also an important fact for the large language models. They rely on vector embeddings by chunking text to understand the context. And without a clear like central reference, like the LLMs may fail to associate an entity with its full like kind of authoritative context with all of its data. If it's only looking in the one page and it's not connected to the full context at entity home on another web page, it may miss some of the connections. It'll have an incomplete understanding, and you can remove this redundancy by defining those entities consistently and build up a semantic data layer to enhance the understanding. Andrea, you mentioned that Amazon was building a knowledge graph. I was wondering if you could comment.
Yeah, I mean, in the e-commerce space, we typically look at Amazon as a reference for constructing their web pages and the product data. And quite ironically, they don't use structured data, right? If you look at Amazon, the use of structured data is very minimal. Reality is that Amazon has been first in investing in what we would call a product knowledge graph. And a product knowledge graph is a graph that instead of being made of web pages, is made of product attributes and describes the catalog of whatever the merchant is selling. And because they have this product knowledge graph and they have invested on RDF technologies like we are, they are capable of creating such a compelling experience on the front end. That is to say that if we look at one of the if not the best e-commerce in the world, the reason why they are so appealing on the HTML layer is because their data is so well organized in the product knowledge graph. Now, this is becoming even more interesting because specifically this aspect of the ID, after many years, right? For many years, we've been using this, linked data ID. So this is a concept that is derived from the linked data stack. And it's really a core element of the semantic web technology, the fact that we have to give a URI, a universal source information for ID for every piece of content or every product that we have out there. So we've been using the standard that it was coming from the W3C. But reality is that now, specifically in e-commerce, these standards has been embraced by the GS1. So the standard organization that creates the code for the barcode. So any product has basically its own passport through a G team. Now this G team uses the linked data standards. And the beauty of this is that when we build the product knowledge graph, now with this ID, we can be interoperable with the same standard that design the barcodes. And that's huge because that means that the data structure that you have for your e-commerce is also serving right here, right now, the purpose of improving the way in which the logistic, for example, handle the product data and design, how the product can be moved from A to B. And so there is a wealth of use cases that derives from the fact that we are using a unique identifier, which is standard with linked data and now standard with GS1. And so for me, that was a pretty impactful revelation on how these semantic ID have a value beyond e-commerce.
How they come together. We actually have a question. I'm going to throw it in here. Does the full markup snippet, the ID, refer to have to be on the same page? Or are you saying that having consistent IDs across the site with only the most authoritative pages on the side defining the ID? So can you kind of give us an example, Mark, a little bit more on that?
Yeah, we talk a bit about this in an upcoming slide. And the ideally, you're having that ad ID that's referred to from another page. So it would be from one page, you're referring to that entity that's on the other page. And if it's mentioned on this page, you can include it like maybe the first. We look at it like as degrees or hops away from the kind of the entity. So you would just include maybe the first degree kind of properties of that entity on the page it's mentioned on. But Google's been crawling the ad ID since 2017. So like you don't have to give it much context. You just can say an ad ID and it will follow it. And it'll follow that even if that URI is not mentioned anywhere on the page, but it's in the markup.
All right, Mark, back to you.
Yeah, I just want to maybe circle back for a second. Andrea mentioned the GS1, and I think it's a great illustration or kind of exemplar for like extending the schema.org vocabulary. And so it had been designed a couple different ways to do extensions to it. And the GS1 has taken it as a sort of upper ontology, it's a vocabulary more to me, but to then extend it to more specialized kind of cases to have even more details. It's a great way of doing it. And I might point people to the work of Tony Seal, who's been talking a lot about extending schema.org inside the enterprise. He's written a lot about that. He's been presenting also on working on that data, the data product catalog as well. Anyway, I just like the idea of extending it because it's a vocabulary and you can reuse it and you can extend it, and that's a good use case.
One thing, sorry, Mark, to interrupt, but one thing about the ID from the data consumer point of view. Let's assume that I want to train a language model. The fact that I have this ID, so I'm not saying that Google is doing this, but I'm saying that if you want to train your own language model, the fact that you have these consistent IDs across the site allows you immediately to create a consistent training data set about everything that you might have around an entity, whether that is a product, a person, a concept. And this has a huge advantage for me as, a practitioner in AI that needs to create training data sets. So these unique IDs have many different use cases beyond Google itself.
Yeah.
I love that we've just like nerded out on ad IDs for the last like 10 minutes. So I think this is just like such a great example. Well, and I think what was interesting when I kind of spoke at some conferences this fall was like a lot of people aren't putting ad IDs in their schema markup. So action item for, all 400 people listening in, like go and check, like, are you using ad IDs? You've just heard sort of why there's like real value to that. All right, Mark, we're going to hand it back to you and we're going to talk a little bit about entity maturity.
Yeah, the ad IDs again. Yeah, 10 minutes is great, but they're like without it, you're kind of creating little islands of schema markup, and I like to have a comprehensive, like, good quality data set for training and all those other things. So this entity maturity scale, we introduced this about 2 years ago, and it's mostly to kind of illustrate how organizations can progress from a keyword concept to like this sort of fully complete, I would say, entity kind of way of expressing your data. So it goes from keywords to topics, and it does borrow a little bit from Tim Berners-Lee 5-star linked data model, where data becomes more meaningful and connected at each stage. And of course, everyone knows keywords, the most basic level. Topics are, again, just groups of those keywords going a bit higher. So once you start looking at entities, and you can start to connect those entities with context, with those triples, and sort of kind of creating some of this extra information about maybe there's synonyms for those topics, maybe those topics are organized in a taxonomy, maybe some things are narrow or broader, and the misspellings and all those things, like those, that's kind of the context I'm talking about on that level. The linked entities on the fourth one is what Martha was describing earlier, where we're connecting those topics or those elevated keywords, if I can call it that, to those authoritative sources like Google and Wikidata. Like that helps you to really connect and create like a really mature entity almost. And then the last one is maybe the best one for me anyway. It's where you're starting to connect your entities with your own entities across your websites. And so this is a more advanced stage where you're fully interconnected and you're forming that rich structured data layer for content discovery, automation, analytics. So you can get a lot out of that. And so as you move up the scale, you gain more structured, interconnected, machine readable data, and there's a lot you can do with that. Zooming back out like to the 10,000 foot view, this is a network graph that's very busy, but it just kind of gives you an idea that these things are connected. This is like a website. This is one account. This is just sort of like they're all kind of nodes and edges, and everything should be connected ideally. So, and you don't really have to take our word for it. Gartner names two things in the middle here. So, emerging technologies for 2024. They called out just the two things of generative AI for the productivity and knowledge graphs as the critical enabler. So why are knowledge graphs so important in this AI revolution? Like this is it's just really a great question, and I think this is an enabler for your generative AI. So if you've only been thinking about one, like think about the other to kind of complement and to drive forward into the next years. So you can, what I like to talk about is, or describe, is like taking control of your data story. So knowledge graphs are a way for you to create a semantic data asset, like your data layer. And the thing is that it's not going to change that over time. And in the marketing environment that is having a lot of things being introduced from like DeepSeek or ChatGPT or whatever's next, these things are coming and going, but like using a data center architecture allows you to kind of future-proof your brand and like take control of that story, the narrative that you're trying to tell for your brand. And this is really, I think, a great asset to future-proof. Andrea, anything you want to add on the semantic data layer?
Yeah, I mean, my point of view here is it's simple. I mean, look at the return of the investment first. When modeling data, kind of understanding where the value is today and tomorrow, it's always key, right? Because the risk of overdoing it, the risk of doing something that will not be practically consumed by anyone, or we've been there, right? I mean, when we first started, at least on our side, we've been very prolific in inviting a lot of triples into these graphs. And then as we started to become the consumer of the data, we started to be more focused, and we started to look at, what are the things that really matter for these or that application. And of course, each one of us gains a lot of experience on what we think the search engine is using with these or that data point. But my added viewpoint here is look at the business returns and model the data accordingly, because that's going to help you a lot.
Well, speaking of use cases, so, like we've talked about the importance of kind of modeling the data, and I think this is where WordLift and Schema App are sort of right at the epicenter of, like, they have the semantic data layer for their clients. How are they reusing that? So, Andrea, I want to hand it over to you and ask you to share a little bit about, like, how are you thinking about reusing that semantic data layer?
Yeah, I mean, since the beginning of the transformer area, so 2021, we started to blend the symbolic AI approach, the graph data, with this large language model. I think I started with GPT-2, then I started to use T5, and then we brought this functionality into the platform. And so by doing that, we were initially able to create content at scale that could be grounded with the data in the knowledge graph and could be validated with the data in the knowledge graph. And remember that there is an advantage in having data in the graph also, because it is simpler for you to validate a data point in an RDF triple rather than checking a potential hallucination in a string of text. It costs a lot less, right? Especially if you do it on millions of products. We currently publish over 150 million of entities across different brands. And so when you start scaling up the data, you really want to be conscious on, how do I clean it up? And of course, if your data is structured, the cleaning can be done very quickly. If you need to create a training data set for your model, you want to have the data in place that is semantically organized for the training. And in this example, this is a very simple application that we have available as a GPT on OpenAI, and then it's on the client's website in the form of a Microsoft Copilot, and it's an e-commerce site, right? So it's a traditional e-commerce that it's getting the value of the rich results that we discussed before. But because as a graph, we were capable of creating a neural search implementation. And so with these AI concierge, AI sommelier, basically a user is capable of finding the best wine match. And of course, I'm from Italy. We're strong on wine and food.
Sounds great.
So it was a good fit. So it's a good fit. So this is one of the first example where the data in the graph builds a highly valuable neural search engine that allows a user to say, okay, I have these artichoke dishes, very traditional from Rome. What is the best wine for it? And then we can use the AI and the graph to find the best matches. And you have control over it, because as you can see here in this chart, there are the attributes in schema that are actually used for creating these query. And data is represented in both ways. There are triples and there are vectors. And so the system can blend the two and can give the right answer, and you get precision. Because as we progress, everyone can use a language model, but as we progress, quality becomes the most relevant aspect for Google, for your users.
Yeah, I think the quality of the data, right? This is going to be sort of the last topic we're going to kind of touch on. I think the other piece that you mentioned is like hallucinations. Like, we work with a lot of enterprise clients, and so making sure their data is robust and that whomever is consuming it is getting the right answers for the brand and how the brand is being understood is so critical. Um, there was that data.world article that had some research around, large language models when using a knowledge graph, like in that kind of interoperability, it was, I think, 300% more accurate, or like, more successful in getting the accurate result. And so there's also strong research, right, coming out that a strong semantic data layer is like helping you achieve your goals, and enterprise really care about getting the answers right. So that's how we see it. Andrea, you had one more kind of example that you were going to kind of talk to.
Yeah, and I think I can also take the question on by Diana on how do we avoid hallucination. So this is an example of the data in the knowledge graph that it's used in the context of what is called graph retrieval augmented generation. So we have the triples that describe the product, and these triples are used first for training the model, second for generating the prompt dynamically based on the data that we have in the graph, and third, to validate if the generated content is consistent with the attributes of the product. And so this gives us the boundaries for controlling and limiting any potential hallucination throughout the process, because we are training the model with the data in the graph. And so we're using what is called data to text. And then we're using the data to validate, the outcome of the language model. And these allow us to create 2,000 product descriptions per minute that are validated. And then, of course, the system will automatically flag if there's something that it's uncertain. For example, if, in the writing, the model has used an attribute that is not present in the data, because we can fact check, okay, as we generate. And so these are examples. Now, another, I think, important question that was raised here by Brian is, do you find...
Oh, I'm going to do... Let's do those ones at the end. I want to just get through the content first. We'll do questions at the end. So yeah, I got Brian's, and then I have another one that's, I thought that was a good one coming up around sort of like how you make the value case. So let's go through like the next bit of content, and then we'll answer questions. So put those in. Andrea, anything else you want to talk about the AI generated SEO titles and descriptions?
There is a world, but I think it's fine.
And yeah, for us, what we've been working on is the entity hub, and so this is going to acknowledge graphs for your content strategy. And there's four jobs to be done. So to identify the entities in your content, you want to manage those entities to increase the accuracy. This is how you're managing its links, like in managing your taxonomy. You want to report out whether those entities are performing on your SEO metrics, and then starting to optimize. So again, these are the kind of the jobs we've done. If you're interested in that, like, we certainly talk to the team and we've been working through this with a number of our customers, and it's been great. And I think you'll start to gather all of the value for the content strategy and the content insights out of this. Next slide, please. And so again, this is like elevating your topic authority. You can get this with precision, to Andrea's point earlier, and the personalization has a lot of opportunity with this knowledge graph. It's something we're exploring with the customers as well, and the audience engagement. So like, how do you recommend the right things to the right people at the right time? Martha?
All right, back to me. My big question was really around like, how does this sort of like, we're sort of still playing, I'm still seeing a lot of organizations in the SEO space like look at keywords, right? Like keywords is that central play. How is this different from like keyword optimization? Mark?
So this kind of like shifts the narrative. So if you go to the next slide, like even I think of moving from keyword wranglers to data architects. So the evolution of SEO in the age of AI is really kind of switching kind of a bit of the mindset. Like you've been optimizing for web pages. So think of those web pages have data, your content layer is data. Like, how are you thinking of using that data in the future? And when you're thinking of LLMs, Andrea gave some great examples for in those use cases there earlier. But for sure, this is there's an opportunity to be more data centric and to think of this as a necessary asset in the future. Andrea, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very interesting area. You know, when we start to see it, you know, what is the value of semantic data when dealing with language model, whether small or large. Language model needs structure, and you know, I've been a strong advocate of this emerging new standard called LLMS text that could act. Similarly to a robot TXT for helping LLMs consume content from a website, for example. A large language model typically is trained on content that is expressed in Markdown. And so this new standard provides basically the language model with a compact and Markdown version of your content. And so as this new possible new standard was introduced in late November, I immediately created from the graph, you know, our own version of the LLMS text. And so the other day, you know, because the debate is growing and, you know, there's more interest in understanding how we can prepare the content for this last large language model, you know, I asked my CDO to look at some log data. And quite surprisingly, we found that the ChatGPT bot that's visiting this file every day, pretty much since we published it. So the language model and these AI search engine are really looking for structure. Now, this structure might be expressed in your Markdown file or might be expressed in structured data, but you need to have the semantics that allows you to create these on scale. Because of course it's fine to create a, you know, a simple index, an LLMS text. I created a free tool, but how do you keep it, you know, allowing for, I don't know, 10,000 products that might change every day in terms of availability and price? You know, you need semantic structure to generate the content that these LLMs need.
Yeah, it's really sort of about getting that clear structure. Mark, do you want to talk a little bit about the role of SEO, and then we're going to go to questions. So if there's questions, put them in the chat, and we'll address them right after Mark.
I really like that the line on the last one, which is generative AI applications will come and go, but your data is forever. I just think that it's like, you know, DeepSeek just came on the scene, but like, well, all of these things need data, and in the Dave McCombs semantic arts kind of mindset, it's data centric architecture. The applications come and go, but your data like persists. Like your CRMs might switch in the same case. Those systems, that are helping with search and discovery, they're going to come and go. And the thing that you can work on is the data layer that's provided to that. So when we go into like designing and building knowledge graphs, like you want to identify your entities, define the attributes, map the relationships, and using the structured data. Schema markup can be used as this kind of foundational kind of tool. And optimizing for agents, not just algorithms, means thinking beyond like traditional rank vectors and focusing on how AI agents will discover. And as Andrea is pointing to, the agents, the LLMs.txt is a great way. Curating and connecting your data, you want to make sure it's accurate, consistent, complete across all of your platforms and touch points. Interlink your data, bring in maybe your video assets, bring in some of the other assets. All of this would be useful to kind of connect for the LLMs and agents in the new world. The semantic web, grasp it, the principles of it, the linked data, how does it contribute to a more intelligent, sort of connected web? Like, I just love this kind of this slide to kind of describe, like, none of this is new. Like, the semantic web has been a vision since 1996, and with there was the famous paper here from Tim Berners-Lee and Aura and James, who published that article in 2001. But this was a semantic web, and like Aura is still building. He's still doing great stuff at AWS. And he recently presented at the International Semantic Web Conference, recapping the original vision and describing how the semantic web was always about knowledge representation and autonomous agents. And we're fortunate to kind of stand on the shoulders of these giants, as well as like Dan Brickley and Guha, who developed the schema.org vocabulary and some of the other principles. Yeah, Andrea, like you mentioned being in this for 20 years, like have you immediately grasped, I guess, the power of the semantic data or the semantic layer? Like, how did you arrive at this?
Well, I mean, I started from the problem of organizing web content in content management system. This is how I started my journey with the semantic web technologies. But the agent part was still remain pretty vague until 2023, when we created the first version of Agent WordLift. And then it became immediately clear that knowledge representation on one side and autonomous agent on the other were going to be the future of AI. And that right now, if I think, what is the product that WordLift is selling, it is not really the knowledge graph, but it's the agent that uses the graph. And it's the ability to create a workforce for a client and say, okay, I want to build best product data, or I want to, automate SEO. And the knowledge representation, it's crucial for creating this automation. And that's been very recent. I mean, and we're still not there.
I know, it's like just in the last little bit, right? Like there's been this shift. I would say, like, even if we were to just look at how often knowledge graphs and ontologies, like it's become more mainstream, even just in the last, 6 months, as people
Yeah.
are figuring out, right, that your content and the data is at the center of all of this, which is I think what Gartner was calling out. Yeah, while you're like really exploring the agent piece, we continue to explore like how do we help enterprise organizations build that semantic data layer on their marketing content, right? And so we're both kind of playing in that space, right, about how the semantic data is at the core. Okay, I'm gonna go to a couple questions. All right, we got 5 minutes left here. The one question that I think you were going to call out from Brian. A lot of work goes into kind of mapping entities and establishing predicates and relationships, triples. It seems to contribute to a lot more than SEO. Good. Okay, Brian's catching on to what we're talking about. I love it. Content, IA, personalization, localization, but it's usually the SEOs advocating for ontologies to the engineering team. What do we find is the most success in talking to a buying committee that is larger than an SEO team? Okay, so maybe I'll take this one since the salesperson in me is just chomping at the bit. So I think there's really a couple things. One we've already mentioned, which is often the buyer or sort of the executive is being asked about how they're making sure the brand shows up in all these kind of AI, how they're controlling that messaging and making sure they're avoiding hallucinations. Because you can imagine for, a bank or for a hospital, that's trouble, right? That's got kind of risk written all over it. So a lot of them are sort of talking about the future proofing, or sort of how are we investing in making sure that we're controlling the semantic understanding of our content is one sort of way that they tackle that. The other is like you actually pull different stakeholders into that buying decision. For us, we often partner with the technology teams. This is something they often really want to do, but because they're in a large organization, building an ontology is really hard. And so the fact that we can partner with them, allow them to do that really quickly at scale, while also meeting all of their enterprise security needs, is really sort of another kind of thing that then the engineering team gets really excited about it. And then they often are thinking about, well, what are the use cases that they can use it? So Andrea, this is where you come in. Are there agents that they are building themselves or other things that they want to do? So that's often how we talk about it. We do still talk about the different value propositions though. So, today we talked about like there is still an SEO value proposition today, right? Like act on it. You're going to get a higher click-through rate. There is still sort of work in disambiguation. And then a lot of it is enabling sort of that future roadmap around innovation. So that's Mark, do you want to add anything, Andrea?
Yeah, just quickly, Semantic Arts is a consulting group that has been doing ontologies for big enterprises for many, many years. And David Coleman I mentioned earlier is great. But they always describe it as like start small but think big. Like they always go to like a really narrow use case and try to nail that, and then build like iteratively on it, because it actually works really well in that sort of iterative kind of sense. The knowledge graph can allow you to kind of expand on the use cases nicely, but thinking big. So like you might need to find maybe a partner or a project or some sort of division. I think would be where to start.
What I can add to this is that recently, whether a few years back, we had kind of head start with the SEO and the marketing team. If I look at the last, 24 months, the head start is always with the product team.
Amazing.
And but there is no gain if there is no multiple actors in the organization that start to see what is going on there, right?
Love
What
that.
can I do with that? And that's how I see this process evolving.
This is a data strategy, right? More than anything. I love finishing on time. We are so glad you joined us today. Andrea, big thank you for joining us in this conversation. Mark, thank you for adding in your expertise. If you want to get to know WordLift, go check out their site. You can see the link there, wordlift.io, join now. Or if you want to connect with them, you can see there on their socials. And then if you want to reach out to Schema App, again, we love building semantic data layers for enterprise customers. Feel free to check us out. We'd love to hear your questions. And thank you so much for joining today. Have a great day.